to player value, right? There's health, which is obvious. There's skills, what can the guy do? Those are both statistically based. What are his yards per target? But also, tape based, scouting based. How fast is he? What kind of 40 time does he have? How high can he jump? How tall is he? How heavy is he? How quick is he? Right. So you have health, skills. You have team context. Is he a receiver that plays with Peyton Manning, or is he a receiver that plays with Jake Locker? That obviously matters a lot. And then role. Does he get 70% of the carries? Is he the goal line back? Is he the short yardage back? Is he the pass catching guy to the backfield on third down? So those are the four variables. But the ones that really change dramatically, team context rarely changes that dramatically. I guess if you're Jordy Nelson, you lose Aaron Rodgers, it does. But pretty much team context is what it is. And right. Your skills kind of are what they are. The ones that change your health, which is just so obvious and unpredictable to us, I do a cheat sheet for that, but that, leave that aside. It's role that changes. We don't really know role. Besides that, after you get out the first 3 or 4 rounds, role becomes a murky thing for a lot of players. And so instead of speculating on role, let's just eliminate that and do a cheat sheet that assumes everyone had the same role. Everybody gets, 550 passing attempts. Everyone had 130 passing targets, and everyone had, every running back had, 250 carries. How would you rank them then? Because you see that a lot of guys are just up there because they're guaranteed a role, but nobody's guaranteed anything. And anybody could get a bigger role. So that's sort of like taking a look at it without that variable.
I do a similar thing for baseball with a good amount of success, actually, helping identify kind of the breakout sort of guys. What it does is it isolates what their skills are, what the players are capable of doing, and assumes that, hey, what happens if they get that there? And, you can tie that into other draft strategies. We spent a lot of time in the last, 2 weeks basically talking about zero running back strategy. Well, the zero running back strategy tries to isolate and tries to find those upside guys late. Although when I had Dalton on the show last week, he made a pretty good point. He's trying to find those guys late in the draft anyhow. But I guess for us, if you're running that draft play, you may go around earlier on those guys. You might try to get a whole collection of those guys because you're not going to get the role guys early on.
Well, Dalton's trying to find those guys anyway, but if he has running backs already, he's also going to be trying receivers of those kind. He'll also be, taking other positions of those kinds because he's got running backs. If you do the zero running back strategy, you're doing running back every round after, I don't know what the exact round is, 7 through, 12. So you're going to get more of them, and it is a numbers game to an extent, right? I mean, you didn't get Carlos Hyde, but you got Christine Michael. Okay, fine, but I also got Niall Davis. I also got, Kiri Robinson. I also got, whoever, Andre Williams, and so now I've got more of them, and whenever anyone breaks, it works out. But yeah, I agree. I think those two things are related. The sense that that all in the zero running back strategy, you're basically taking guys who are cheap who don't have roles. That's the variable they're missing. They have everything else, and all you need is a role change through an injury to get them a role. So I think that's important. I think to isolate why a guy is good is important because it shows you. It helps open your mind to possibilities, which is, well, what would have to happen for this guy to be valuable? Or for a guy who, has a big role now, Marshawn Lynch, if he holds out and Christine Michael impresses to the point where they're like, okay, well, even though Lynch is back, we're now reducing Lynch's role. Is he really a volume guy? He averaged 4.2 yards per carry last year. He did have a decent amount of catches, but he's not really a receiver. How valuable is he if he's splitting time with other backs?
Good question. That's a really good question, and I don't know. The thing is, I like this, and I like that trying to isolate some of these type of players there, and just identifying those guys. And I'm going to use your blog pretty well when I go through my draft pick. I want to move on. I want to talk a little Josh Gordon. You suggest that you should take him as early as the 5th round now.
Yeah, there's a conflicting report on ESPN, but I'm going to say that that's kind of weak, the argument they have. Although the NFL. We should never be surprised by how in the dark ages the NFL is, right? I mean, They can rule, and everyone hates it, but they're the NFL and give the big middle finger to everybody because they know they're really, what are we going to do, not watch? So, but to the extent they care at all about their image whatsoever, to the extent they care about, female fans, which is probably a growing segment, which is something that's not as built in as male fans, I would say, to a large extent that they're trying to expand. These things matter, and forget about the moral and ethical end of it, which I really don't think they care about one bit, no matter what they would say. Maybe they do, maybe I'd be surprised, but for the most part, I don't think these big corporations. That's just that's a cost of doing business. The cigarette companies donate to the arts, and they don't care about the arts. They just got to do that to not be vilified. So the situation is basically, Ray Rice gets a 2-game suspension for on video. I don't know if you've seen the video. Have you watched the video of Ray Rice?
I have countless times because like Oberman did his take on it there, and he kept replaying it there multiple times. Yes.
Okay. So basically on video, he's dragging his unconscious wife out of the elevator, and it turns out no one's denied it that he smacked her, and that's why she was unconscious. And he got 2 games for that, right? And people were justifiably up in arms. If you really care about the conduct policy, I mean, it's one thing to be suspended for, by your own team for not showing up to practice or stuff that hurts the team, but there's that conduct policy. Obviously, hitting your wife doesn't diminish your on-field performance, but there's the NFL. If you're really making the NFL look bad with bad off-the-field conduct, you can be suspended. And for them, that was 2 games, okay, for that type of behavior. Josh Gordon, he's had 70 negative marijuana tests in the last calendar year. He's been tested 70 times, all negative. He got suspended 4 games, 2 games last year, 4 games without pay, because he had codeine in his Tylenol. I mean, or whatever it is. It was like a codeine supplement that hadn't been cleared. I mean, come on, right? This is hardly a guy who's a criminal. Then the weed test that he had that was positive, really was divided into 2 samples, A and B. The A test was actually, I don't know which is which, but one of them was below the threshold to count as a positive test. So he was actually negative. The other one, which is just they should be the same, right? I mean, they should be evenly distributed, was barely above the threshold. That's all they got of him. That's it, okay? And he claims, well, I was around secondhand smoke, and that's why I have this very low amount in my system. Now, today on ESPN, there's a bunch of pundits said, oh, the secondhand smoke defense has never worked, and some spokesman, some douche for the NFL was like, players are responsible for what's in their bodies. First off, secondhand smoke thing has never worked because not to my knowledge, has anybody been that barely over the limit. And in fact, Major League Baseball and the Olympics, their testing thresholds for marijuana are far higher because of that. Because somebody with just secondhand smoke who was around it could have this level. If it were higher, it would be impossible to say you got it from secondhand smoke unless you were basically sitting in a room with 3 people smoking weed with the windows and doors closed and just breathing in all the secondhand smoke. Just for casually getting it, their thresholds are higher. It can never happen. That's why they raised them, so this wouldn't be a possibility. So the idea that it's never worked, the secondhand smoke defense, is obviously because no one's ever been just barely over this from a threshold that's lower than any other sport. So I think it may be more persuasive here, despite what that PR idiot from the NFL was saying. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not.
Let me ask you this. What's the likelihood, what's more likely, the NFL raising Ray Rice's suspension or lowering Josh Gordon's significantly to about the same one?
I don't think he can raise Ray Rice's suspension. I think that's a dumb
I don't think so either.
Like
I don't think they're going to. I don't think that's going to happen at all.
Once you're acquitted, you could say, yeah, I did murder the guy. Screw you. You could say that because it's double jeopardy, right? So the point is, there's all this outrage justifiably so, from the Ray Rice slap on the wrist for assaulting his wife, right? And that has a shelf life. Stephen A. Smith almost got fired for his comments. A bunch of stuff happens, and then it kind of dies down, even though people are still pissed about it. If Gordon gets a heavy-duty suspension, especially a season-long, even of 8 games, I would say, it's just going to rekindle the whole thing all over again because people are going to say this kid who barely was on limit past 70 tests. It's so invasive. He's got to get tested 70 times for what? Codeine and weed? I mean, he's never assaulted anyone to anyone's knowledge. There's no negative thing except some weed in college. And it's like this guy's going through this, whereas this is what the NFL really thinks. And then moreover, the climate, the background. There's 23 states it's legal to have medicinal marijuana. 2, it's legal just to smoke weed in your house recreationally. The New York Times on its front page endorsed an end to federal prohibition, meaning the U.S. government has nothing to do with it, and states, state by state, they can legalize as they wish, and there's no federal response. It's not even illegal federally. So This is the climate, and this is the people, the millennials, they care about, domestic violence. They care about things like, they're mostly pro legalization of marijuana. And so, if the NFL wants to be so out of step, and it probably can't afford to be, it can do that. But I think any sensible reading of this, especially given the circumstances in Gordon's particular case, he should get nothing. He should get less than Ray Rice. He should get a game, maybe 2 games at most, or maybe just nothing. And I think there's a possibility that happens. The other issue is he had a DUI after that, which does not look good, and maybe he gets suspended separately 4 games for that, which that's more of a serious offense. Someone could get hurt. But he blew also a .09. And again, you got to draw the line somewhere, and he was over it, but driving on a .09 is categorically different than driving on like a .21 or whatever the numbers are. One is Alden Smith revving the motor passed out into the tree, and one is, maybe he was an ounce over the limit, and he probably should have taken a cap.
Right, and it seems like to me like Gordon just lives on that line. I guess that's part of the problem. And I know it's the repeated violations is why he has got that. I mean, look at how he entered the league in the first place there. He was suspended at Baylor. He went through the supplemental draft. That's how they got him in the first place. Right. I think all that is factoring in. And whereas Ray Rice, hasn't had their logic is that Ray Rice has never had an incident of any sort beforehand. So that's why they're lenient the first time. I don't think it makes sense. I'm not trying to justify it, but I'm thinking that's probably the mindset there a little bit, right?
I'm sure it is. But it's like, let's say you steal $1 from 20 different people, and I steal $1,000 from one person. You know what I mean? It's like,
right.
I only did it once, but like, is not my crime graver than yours? I mean, let's say you punch 20 people, but I kill one person. I just feel like it doesn't. The number of times is just, that I can understand that being a factor, but it's pretty clear in this case that the one time outweighs 100 of these times, and it starts to call the policy about it.
I agree.
And so, look, again, I'm counting on the NFL to be somewhat rational, but I also think it's in their interest to say, you know what, marijuana is, things have changed legally, the climate has changed. Josh Gordon has not publicly been caught smoking marijuana. This is something that's in his blood these past 70 times. It would just be so draconian to suspend this guy for even 8 games would be so draconian. Last year, the codeine supplement, I think it's really about control. The NFL wants to have control over these guys. And Ray Rice is probably a guy who, pretty much like is a company guy when he's on the field. He does what he's supposed to do. And
So, and you can see that control coming out in other sentences too. I mean, with the celebration penalties or the violation fine, uniform violation fines, things like that. So let's try to put a value on Josh Gordon. You say 5th round. Why 5th round?
Well, I say let's give him 10 to 12 games based on a sort of expected return in all the scenarios, right? Because I really don't think he's going to get the book thrown at him. So let's say he's 10 to 12 games. What's that worth? Well, I think that's worth a 4th round pick because he'd be a 1st round pick if he played 16. And remember, 12 games or say 11 games of Josh Gordon is not 0 without him. It's 5 games of a replacement plus 11 games of Josh Gordon. So that to me is worth a 3rd or 4th round pick. And the question is, would you rather have, and let's just say it were 8 games, would you rather have 8 games of Gordon and 8 games of him suspended, or a 50-50 chance of 16 or 0? In other words, would you rather have it just be he's got 8 games, and that's what or there's a 50% chance he gets 0 suspension, a 50% chance he gets a season-long suspension? Which would you rather?
I would rather have it's Stark because I don't think there's a chance at 0. But we'll say 16 to 2.
There's a chance at 0. He could easily be suspended the whole year. I mean, at least technically.
I think because of the DUI, I think it's. I understand the limits, but I think that minimum.
You don't think there's a chance that he plays 16 games?
I don't think there is. No.
Okay.
I think there's. I should say it's 14 or 0 is what I should say. Yeah, okay. That's what I meant to say. Okay. I think I'd rather have that though.
Me too. I'd rather go all in because you know what? If you look, I say I would take him in the 5th. I think and then I said you could probably get him in the 6th right now, this moment. Okay, maybe the 7th even. But you start playing chicken where you don't want someone else to make that gamble instead of you. You lose your 6th round pick. No one's ever lost a league because their 6th round pick didn't pan out in fantasy football. You got 1st round picks bust all the time. 2nd, 3rd, 6th. I mean, you may as well have, to me, a very significant chance, a 30% or a 25% chance of getting a 1st round pick out of that, based on him playing 14 or 13 or 12 games, or between his 12 and the 4 you get from someone else that's worth a 1st round pick. Than you're going to get from any other 6th round pick.
What's your price on him in the RotoWire Stake League auction right now? $200 budget. I don't believe it's PPR. I think there is a flex and 3 receivers.
Yeah, I don't think there was a flex last year.
It's hard to tell. Biggest one in the Stake League, I always get conflated.
Yeah, I get confused. I don't like the stupid 3 points. There's some dumb rules about those leagues, but they're both good leagues. So I think I would say I'm going to say $17, $18. What do you think?
Sounds about right. Thing is, we're going to know. I mean, the hearing is Friday, August 1st, and chances are they're going to rule pretty quickly just for the Browns' sake, if nothing else. So the Browns know what they're going to have this year.
Yeah, Jason Brown did take him in the Vegas League, so he needs to know. The other thing I would say is that In that league, it's actually maybe less than 18 because it's 16 teams, so there's not ready replacements. So and it's a pretty short bench, 6-man bench, right? If you're in the 12-team NFFC with 10-man benches, PPR, I think he's clearly a 5th-round pick right at this moment, right? If you're in a league with 16 teams and shallow benches, not only is losing him a bigger blow to you because there's not that much left, but secondly, if he's suspended 8 games, it's going to be tough to carry him through the bye weeks, right? So the deeper your bench, the more valuable he is.
Right. So Yahoo friends and family, 10th round pick, 8th round pick, what?
I'd still take him in like the 7th or 8th. I mean, again, if he's suspended 4 games, you live through that, you figure it out. So
I guess it kind of depends on what you're drafting with too. If you're doing 0 running back and you've gone 3 elite wide receivers to start your draft, maybe you're more inclined to take Gordon because you already know that you've got that base. Now you got this upside guy that's going to be in your flex eventually, and I might be more inclined to go there in that sort of format as opposed to another one where I know I'm going to be in that 5th or 6th round. I know I'm going to need a receiver. I think it might be a little bit different that way.
Now in the FSTA draft, I started with running backs at the 2nd pick, and I took LaShawn McCoy. On the way back, I took Julius Thomas and then C.J. Spiller. And then in round 4, I didn't like the receivers, so I took Bishop Sankey. And so I had 3 running backs right out of the gate and a tight end. And then I went with Macklin in round 5, and I got guys like Dobson later, and I got Gordon in round 8 in that league. And I got Sammy Watkins, a bunch of guys. And I love
Gordon before or after the DUI? I forget.
It was before the DUI. I got him. That was when I started getting, it's sunk. It's over. But the two things, obviously this thing's a big deal, and the fact that DUI is so barely, he may get acquitted from that. He's going to have his lawyers probably get him out of that.
Find out soon enough. I want to talk about one more topic you blogged about, value-based drafting, the problems with it. We're talking about various strategies, and one of the big problems with value-based drafting is it's kind of incumbent upon your projections, your values being right in the first place there. And obviously there's an error rate, and everyone's going to have an error rate. It's just a question of how far off are you when you're trying to figure out what's a good value.
Well, let's just talk about what value-based drafting is and isn't, right? I mean,
good point.
Whatever values you use, you got to use values of some kind, right? I mean, you've got to have rankings of some kind. If you don't do projections or points, then you're drafting more based on feel. But if you actually have projected points, obviously there's error rates in those, but if you're using that as a tool, then basically what value-based drafting is that each guy's value is the extent to which he exceeds the value of a baseline player in his position. So, if you have a 12-team, 1 QB league, you could say, okay, well, my quarterback's worth whatever he is ahead of the number 12 quarterback. Okay, so if I have the number 8 quarterback, he scores 20 more points on the season than the number 12 quarterback, he's a plus 20. Okay, my running back, since it's a two running back league, no flex, the 24th running back is considered the baseline. Let's just say you don't have to use that because I'll go into in a second why you can use different baselines. Receiver, it's a 3-receiver league. The 36th receiver is the baseline. Tight end, the 12th tight end. Okay, and the extent to which the guy you pick exceeds those baselines is the extent to what his value is, and it allows you. The good thing is it allows you to compare guys across positions. So Peyton Manning may be 75 points ahead of Russell Wilson, whoever your number 12 guy is, and LaShawn McCoy may be 100 points ahead of Toby Gerhardt, or whoever your number 24 guy is, and so he's 27 points more valuable than Peyton Manning. And you just order the guys by their number to which they exceed the baseline guy. Mm-hmm. And that's great as sort of a general guideline of drafting value, because it allows you, again, to compare across position. Instead of just saying, I think you should take him. He's a good quarterback. He's the number 1 on the board. Instead of just having these vague arguments, you actually quantify why this guy or that guy is more valuable. But there's a couple of problems. One is the baseline's a bit arbitrary and doesn't necessarily work. If you were in a league where you simply drafted your starters and didn't draft the bench until everyone had their starters, that would work better, because then you would know that if you didn't take Peyton and you didn't take a quarterback, that Russell Wilson would definitely be there with your final pick, right? So you know what the baseline was. But what if someone takes a second quarterback? And what if a few people take second quarterbacks? Now your baseline is not really Russell Wilson anymore. So that's a little nebulous, and especially with running backs, people totally take 3-4 running backs to start their draft. I mean, that happens all the time with receivers. That's one issue. Issue number 2 is it's not like somebody just takes Russell Wilson and leaves him in their lineup all year. They mix and match based on matchups. So that number 12 guy's stat line is not the number 12 slot's stat line. And what you really need to do to find a baseline is if everyone's an active owner, what's the what's the last place quarterback's active slot? What's that slot worth? How many points does that quarterback slot score? How many points does that second running back slot score?
Right.
That's hard to figure out with special flex positions. And how's the tuberculosis? Is it okay?
Wow, I just got super dry apparently, but
Yeah. All right. I don't,
there we go. Much better.
Okay. If you started to die,
and so the baseline is necessarily going to be higher, and so that you're really going to have, because they're going to have, the bottom guy, the guys that are using the number 12 quarterback, for instance, they're using the number 12, 13, 12, and 15 quarterback, and they're going to optimize their lineups a little bit better. Whereas if you, who are using the number 3 quarterback, you're using him every single week except for one.
And because there's always quarterbacks available and running backs who get regular carries are scarce, you could say that actually the real baseline for running backs is a lot lower because people stash so many running backs and so few quarterbacks. And so that's why you take LeSean McCoy so far ahead of Peyton Manning, not just the value-based drafting difference, but because reality is that the baseline is much higher for quarterbacks with the mix and matching and much lower for running backs. But the other thing that's totally not calculated is volatility, right? I mean,
right.
Peyton Manning's projection is way more solid than McCoy's, right? I mean, if you wanted to say these top 3 quarterbacks and the chances that they live up to their projections versus McCoy, Charles, Peterson, Forte living up to theirs, you'd have to say the quarterbacks have a much better chance, right?
Not only that, but then there's week-to-week volatility too. Whereas, Peyton Manning, he's not going to be flat, but quarterbacks typically, especially the elite ones, they're going to have a higher baseline, and yeah, there'll be some plateaus, but running backs, they're going to be riding the roller coaster. Wide receivers too. And you say you average a certain amount of points, but there's going to be a huge amount of variance from week to week on that too.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. So that's one thing that the consistency is not factored in, and nor is the volatility season long, which is that these projections are just, they're not all equal. They're not all created equal. Somebody's projection is kind of an average of a bunch of stuff, and somebody's projection is basically what he's probably going to do. Okay, and the problem is that when you're talking about your early round picks, you want consistency. You don't want a guy who could be when you're talking about early. But with Josh Gordon, we just said we'd rather have the boom or bust in round 6. But in round 1, you just want about what he's projected for. You don't want to say he's a 50% chance he crushes this and a 50% chance he's out for the year. You don't want that. You just want exactly what he's projected for. So so that Manning projection may be more valuable than those 73 points that he's worth over the baseline quarterback, may be more solid than the 100 that McCoy's worth. So there's a bunch of things that make that a very imprecise way to draft. I'm not saying it's not a good start, but these are a bunch of things that make it tricky.